Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to go back to Annus's Tarentulas, and we're going to use them as an opportunity to look into some of the deeper and more subtle uses of the te worm. These are covered in the regular textbooks and Japanese learning websites, but as usual, they don't explain the logic behind them, which makes them more difficult to grasp, and in some cases, when there isn't a straightforward English equivalent, they really don't tell you what's actually going on, because they only talk in terms of English equivalents, which leaves you guessing quite a bit of time. So, if you remember, Alice was falling very slowly down the rabbit hole, and she had kicked a jar off one of the shelves as she fell. その点には、ラベルが貼ってあった。オレンジマーマレードと書いてあった。So we have three te-formed verbs in this sentence. Let's look at what they're doing. その点には、ラベルが貼ってあった。But is the language by the jar here? It can mean bottle. It's often translated as bottle, but it can also mean a jar, and that's what it means here. Dahare means the neighbor. It's leveru and not reveru, I believe, because it comes from another European language other than English. We can also say reveru, but that's less common, like reveru. Fano means stick or paste something onto something else. So this means Tochelewa was pasted onto the bottle. Literally, speaking of that bottle as the target of something, a label was pasted onto it. Now, this use hatte error we haven't covered in this course up to now. We've talked about te form of a verb plus geru, and we know that geru means be, and te form of a verb plus geru means to be doing that verb, or to be in a state of that verb. What about te error? Tenu also means be, so the meaning is in fact very similar. It also means to be in the state of that verb. However, there is a difference, and I'm going to explain that difference with another example. Let's take the sentence, Mado ga aite iru. And the sentence, Mado ga hakete aru. Both of them mean the window is open. Aite simply means that the window is open, and we can translate that directly into English, and it's really the same thing. But Mado ga hakete aru doesn't have any English equivalent, because it still means the window is open. For it carries another implication. First of all, we are using the Alamu version of aku, which is hakeru. Mado ga haite iru, that's the self-mu version of haku, and it simply means to be open, to exist in a state of openness. Where Alamu verb hakeru, which is the regular to keru ending verb to, is then plus ru of the third law of self-move other move verbs that we've looked at already. So, aku means be open yourself, whatever you are, a box or whatever. Akjenu means open a box, open the door, etc. So what Mado ga hakete aru means is that the window is open, but it was open because somebody else opened it. We're thickening that in the first place by using the alamu version of the verb, and in the second place by using aru instead of iru. So what's the reasoning behind that? Well, when we say Mado ga haite iru, although it is an inanimate object, we're using the version of be, which we use for animate beings, people and animals and things. That, in fact, is the part that needs explaining, isn't it? Why are we using the animate version of be for an inanimate object like a window? And we do this all the time. We're always saying te geru for inanimate objects of all kinds. The reason is that in this expression we're simply saying the window was open. We're not implying that anybody opens a window. So in a way, we can say that we're treating the window as an honorary animate being. The window was open, as it were, of its own volition. We're not saying it's open because of anybody's will other than its own. So in a certain sense, we are treating the window as an honorary animate being. Madoga haite dada. But if we say Madoga hakete dada, we are saying that somebody opened the window. The window was the mere object of having been opened by somebody else. So it loses its status as an honorary animate being. It is treated as a mere object, an inanimate thing. Akate panu. And the thing to understand here is that even though it's lost its status as an animate being, even though we're using the Atamu version of the verb, the Dharma Tetrahu sentence is the window. Matter ga kranton de bang. The window was dream the action, which is Adam. The window is existing in the state of having been opened by somebody else. And that is the same thing that's happening in our sentence from Alice. Son bin nima rabarga de arte. Jar existed in a state of having had a label pasted onto it. Now, as you see, there is really nothing equivalent to this in English, so we just need to get it into our minds so that we can look at the Japanese as Japanese. This is fundamental to what I'm teaching here. I'm teaching a real structural Japanese, not simply throwing some Japanese at you and throwing some English at you and saying, well, this kind of means that. Right, need to get rid of English translation as far as possible and look at the Japanese as it really works in itself as Japanese. And that's why my translations until the trains get weirder and weirder, because I'm not trying to translate this for you into natural English. I'm trying to tell you what the Japanese is really doing. So the second half of the sentence, the second form, of course, is simply joining the first logical clause in this compound sentence to a second logical clause. And the second logical clause is orenji mamaredo to kaite atto. And here we have again this te kari one. And whenever we talk about something being written on something, we tend to use this form. We don't say, the label said orange marmalade, which is what we say in English, as if the label could speak. We say, orange marmalade to kaite atto. To is our quotation particle, of course. That's quoting exactly what was written on the label. And then the kaite haru means that it was in a state of having had those words written on it by somebody else. Now, I'm going to do something a tiny bit unusual here. I hope you won't mind. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit in the story, because the next part contains a very interesting point that really needs a lesson of its own, and the part immediately after that includes something that really rounds out what we're doing today. It introduces te oku, which really belongs together with te iru and te aru. This relationship is something the textbooks don't explain, and because they don't, it leaves te oku rather undefined in people's minds. Many quite advanced students don't really understand why te oku is used in some cases. So we'll go ahead with that now, and I'll just fill you in on the story in between. It's only a little bit. Hannes realizes that the marmalade jar is in fact empty, and what's she going to do with it? She doesn't want to drop it because it'll fall all the way down the hole and very likely kill someone. And if you read the newspapers, you're probably aware that there are far too many empty marmalade jar incidents in Wonderland already. So, now you know the background, let's carry on. Maku todana no hitotsu e tori sukarini ointe buena. Rumaka means skillfully. Jordana, as we know, is a cupboard. Toden no hitotsu, as we talked about in the last lesson, is one of the cupboards. There's your skillfully and passing, put it into one of the cupboards. And what's this oite, oita? Now, they're both the same oku. Oku meaning to put. The first one is simple enough, she put it into the cupboard. But why do we have this second oku on the end of it? Oite, oita. Now this is another very common and very important te form usage, and it's one that the textbooks and English language websites tend not to explain very well, because it's something we really don't have in English. However, we already halfway know it, because it is in a certain sense the other half of te aru. Te oku means to put the action in place. Now in this particular use, it's quite easy to see because she's putting the jar literally into place and just putting that action into place. What the textbooks and the websites tell you is that it means doing something in advance, doing something for the purpose of something else. And this is true in many cases. It's probably the nearest you can get in English. But what it actually means is putting the action in place. And to understand this, let's go back to our example. Mato ga hakete aru. The window is open because somebody opened it. Now, the somebody who opened it, if we say it instead of from the point of view of the window, from the point of view of the person doing the action, hakete oku is the other side of this. The person put the opening of the window into place so that thereafter the window would be open. So you see we have the two halves of the same coin. Mato ga hakete aru. The window stands open because somebody put it there. Naru to hakete oku. Open the window so that it will stand open for the future, so that it will then be open. Put into place the action of opening the window. And this is what oku means. Oku means place. So you're placing the action, you're putting it into place, you're setting it up. And that's why it tends to have the secondary meaning of do in advance or do for another purpose, because you are setting up that action, and the implication is that you want the effect of that action to remain in place for whatever future purposes it may have. In this case, Alice does not have a future purpose. So, in fact, te form plus oku has a much wider range of meaning than the do in advance or do for a purpose kind of English translation that it gets in the textbooks. In the case of Alice in this story, she isn't really doing anything in advance or for a purpose. She's simply trying to solve the problem of what to do with the empty marmalade jar without risking injuring the people below. And there are many cases when this usage falls even further from the English language definitions. For example, people say it's cruel to lock a small child in her room, and for this we use tojikomete oku. Tojikomeru is shut someone off, lock someone away, and the te oku here doesn't mean do it for a purpose, it doesn't mean do it in advance. It means do the action and leave its results in place. Put the action in place and leave it in effect. Similarly, people say it's alright to leave a baby to cry sometimes. Nakase te oku. Naku is cry. Nakaseru is the causative of cry, allowed to cry in this case. And the te oku doesn't mean do it in advance or do it for some special purpose. It simply means do the action and leave its effects in place. Put the action in place. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below and I will answer as always. And I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Task dismissed.